In this video, I interview Felo Restrepo, where we dive deep into understanding APIs so that you can build your AI automations so much better with a greater understanding of what you're trying to achieve, the data you can pass, and how you can use that within your workflows. Plus, stick right through to the end where we dive into MCPs, where you can literally use Claude to trigger AI agents using APIs into the tools that you're currently using right now. So you can build these incredible workflows and allow Claude to really do so much more than what you ever thought was possible. Let's dive in.
So, well, I know if you are already here that you know the power of APIs. If you have probably bought the spectacular program from Mitch, you already know that you can connect a lot of things nowadays and that every business tries to get their infrastructure right in order to be able to serve not only through their interfaces, but also through their backend. So at the end of the day, the interfaces are just a way for humans to interact with software, with services, right? But in the backend of every operation, there's an API. So every time you click a submit button, every time you make a payment, right? Every time you register to something, every time you open a web page, there's an API involved in that operation. And so you can guess it started like a long time ago. These things about the APIs, it was like in 48 or something, like was invented the way of communicating between applications. But it wasn't until 2006 or something like that that Amazon developed this API as a service. They were like the pioneers doing it. And it was amazing because they showed the world how impactful and how lucrative could be just to serve data and to, of course, make it usable for the users of other companies. So you will see companies buying APIs from other companies and serving to the users. And so at the end of the day, you will see APIs everywhere, right? So on top of that, of course, will show you, and maybe you already know about these companies because they are on the program from Mitch on COS, that they are kind of aggregators of other companies. So if you look at it from the standpoint of an entrepreneur, well, you will see opportunities everywhere, right? Because, for example, Fall AI that is growing like crazy, and all they do is to aggregate other APIs. Well, of course, nowadays they have infrastructure and they manage their own servers where they have their models and you can do training there. But at the end of the day, they are kind of an aggregator of a lot of APIs. So you will see in things like this, in dashboards like this, things like ideogram, like Recraft, and they just aggregate that and serve that through their APIs. So every time you go to one of these models that, of course, is from a different company like Flux, you will see that the API is front and center because they know that their clients, that the one that pay the most are developers that just use this, and when they have a lot of traffic, that when they have a lot of users, well, that's the big chunk of their revenue, right? So of course they are also targeting users, common users, like to play around with this technology, right? But they know who their final customer is, and those are developers and entrepreneurs. Same thing with Replicate. This is another one. It's like the contender. Sometimes I find better Fall AI than this, and sometimes I find better Replicate. So it's really great to have competition, but this is just to show you how big this market is and how big the APIs are allowing us to create experiences for other users and to take that technology and repurpose it or repackage it, right? So those are the things that you have to take in mind when you look at APIs. It's like the fact that there are like companies spending billions of dollars in all these models don't exclude the fact that there are underserved markets or underserved verticals where you can fit and you can take this technology and serve it to your clients. And of course, there's another part of the business, which is when you provide an interface, when you provide this front end code or these front end interfaces, well, of course, you have to take care of your backend, right? And for that, you use technologies like Fast API that allow you to very quickly build your own endpoints inside your own server. So that's just to frame the opportunity that you have using APIs. And there are APIs for everything. You can find APIs from the NASA, from everywhere. You can gather data very easily nowadays, and it's just there for you to take it. There's like, for example, a company called Unipile. This is something really, really great for those in, for example, outreach or doing cold DMs, because these companies, what they do is they aggregate API endpoints, right? So they have, for example, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and they have the infrastructure for you to use their API to provide it to your users and make experiences that allow them to operate using your API. And it's extremely cheap, and you can start like for $5 and get your feet wet. And what I recommend when you use things like this is having a tool like Postman, which you will find a lot when you are dealing with APIs that allow you to test fast. So you don't want to start testing your APIs and your endpoints directly in Make or N8N. You can go through apps like Postman, and the same providers of the technology like Unipile will give you this is like the infrastructure of their endpoints, right? So they will give you exactly what they provide, and you can use these endpoints, which are already configured here. You just have to import them into Postman and use them in your workflow. So this way you can test a lot faster, their endpoints. So what you will find at the end of the day with these endpoints is just they have like this protocol, this post get, that allow you to send information or to get information or to update information. And this weird code that probably you are already familiar with is called JSON, which is just a way to organize information for the machines, right? This is a way to have structured outputs and inputs that the machine can process easily. So the way you can test these kind of things is not difficult. So if you go to, let's say, test account, and for example, here in the planner, you will see that if you get this inspector and you start creating posts, when you are doing these things, as soon as I did that, you see that it started populating here, right? So I'm going to click here, test, and I'm going to click here like schedule. So you will see that this scheduling will produce a payload, as you can see right here, right? So if you click on it, you will see exactly what kind of data is being sent through the service, right? So look at that. So right there, I can see exactly the kind of payload that I would put inside of Postman to test this API. So this is a great way, because sometimes you will go to the documentation of these APIs because you want to use them, and you will find that is kind of confused, and not always they have these payloads well structured. You will start like, if you go to the documentation and just play with it, there are some times when APIs which are kind of busy like this, that have a lot of moving points, right? They tend to fail. But when you do it this way, when you do what's happening behind the scenes, will be a lot easier to just copy this payload, right? And take it directly through Make, and inside of Make, create your automation by communicating with that kind of endpoint. Of course, the documentation is really important, right? This will allow you to be certain that your payloads, your JSONs, your messages are being structured the way that the service is expecting. And for this is there's something that is really important to understand, and is about the webhooks and the HTTP request. So let's put that here, an HTTP request. And of course, you must be familiar with Make, but this is something that really clarifies how these APIs work. And as you can see here in the HTTP request, you will find various ways to connect to these API endpoints, right? So the one that I use the most is this make an API authorization request. And authorization is one of those things that are very important when you are building APIs, and Postman allow you to manage that in a lot of ways. You can have like header keys, and you can go right here and set up your authorization from here, right? And then every endpoint will get this same authorization when you are making the calls, when you are submitting the information. So that's something that's really important. And you want to send your authorization API key through the header. So when you build this kind of workflows, you will see that you will have a credentials, right? Here is where you will put that authorization, that API key that will allow you to get identified by the server, right? So in that moment, you will be able to play with the URLs that you will find in their documentation. And of course, those URLs are also provided in this kind of workflows, right? So here you have a base URL, and you can configure your base URL to be whatever you need to be, right? So, but the after the base URL, you have those endpoints, because the base URL is like a static, and the endpoints are the ones that change in the URL. So you can reference that and enter it right here. And the method, that it was the thing that I was telling you, it just tell the server what process are you using when you are requesting or pulling or pushing that data to the server. Now, in the body, okay, we have like the headers, right? The header is the same credentials, it goes inside the headers, but you can also put it right here. Then you have a query string, and this query string is nothing else than some data that goes after the URL. Not every endpoint use everything. Some endpoints, you are just good by putting a URL and clicking get, and it will list some resources, right? For example, Metricool, you can list your accounts. So every endpoint has a different purpose, right? And of course, when we are talking about these big payloads like we are getting here or from Metricool, that's exactly what you want to put right there, right? So I just copy this and I paste it, and oh, there's a trick here, so you don't get this wall full of text, and it's just to click on the shift while you click Control and UV, and that way you get a much more readable structure, right? But then you will see that here it's expecting some things. So here is expecting a string, right? Here is expecting a Boolean. It means like it expects like a true or false condition. It's just a binary option. So that's where the whole automation and replacing the values of the parameters enter to play a game here, right? So you can replace these kind of things with things that you receive, with values that you receive from the webhooks or from your whole automation. So this is a way to get and to put information in the server. And the webhook is that endpoint that is waiting for information to arrive, right? So that's why you see this ray icon here, because as soon as we send to that URL, right now this URL from here has nothing to do with this, but when you send to a URL here, it's exactly what is happening is that a webhook in that server, a webhook like this one, is expecting any information and is triggered when we send with our authorization and with our payload to exactly that endpoint, right? When we have endpoints in our systems, we are doing exactly the same. We are getting webhooks that are waiting for data from our clients to get to our system. So basically, this allow you to replace, to change these values, but you have to take always into account the kind of data that the endpoint is expecting. So in the early days working with Make, I found that like a lot of these things broke, and it's so easy to break them just by inserting like a double quote. You insert a double quote and everything breaks, nothing goes through. So there are ways to mitigate all of that and to manipulate the data inside of Make, right? And that's why we have, for example, things like the JSON parser or the text aggregator. All these text parsers allow us to match patterns, to change line breaks, to avoid, to change, for example, double quotes and make them single quotes. So Make allow us to take that data and modify it and make it readable for these machines, right? To make the instruction useful and compliant with the format that these machines are expecting. So
Absolutely. Let me just cut in here for a moment. Karen
perfect.
did have a question here, which is what is everyone's skill level with APIs? I think Karen comes from a background of being in software engineering and in that space for like 10 to 15 years, if I remember correctly from our conversation. So for someone like that, that's probably all rehashing old skills. This is like the next step that you get to after you've been building inside of make.com for say 3, 6, 9 months. You start to figure out that, okay, surely there are faster ways to build these types of workflows and more reliable ways. So how can we do that? And this is the next obvious step before you actually go into fully coding things, is using both tools but with a little bit of JSON to do all of these things that you're talking about here. And for me personally, I've only just figured this stuff out in the last couple of months as well, like 6 or 9 months into the journey. So if I had a training like this a little bit sooner, I could have moved so much faster as well, which is one of the big reasons why we wanted to provide it for the community. So yeah, very cool to see. Let's just go
Yes,
into
of
what
course. I
Isabel has
will
to say.
go a little bit further once we talk about this, but I think that this is important for you to kind of grasp how the information is flowing, how the data is traveling, what are the hiccups that you are going to find, right, when you are building your automations. And sometimes I won't lie to you, sometimes I got desperate when something of like I've been trying a lot, and but suddenly something happens, like it turn, and it's important also that to be able to debug. And I feel like make.com is not the best, has not the best interface to debugging for and for developers, right? Once you have a grasp of N8N, you say like, oh my god, where have you been all this time, right? Because it's so easy to see the errors, it's so easy to debug, it's so easy to build the logging. It's a totally different experience, right? But the cool thing about Make is that they have integrated a lot of things. So I know that it's also the mutual experience that when you use some native modules like Airtable, for example, that you get a lot, you get less errors, right, at the beginning when you are working with the automation, But later on, just trying to make a new version of some workflow with Airtable is a mess. You have to redo a
Yeah.
lot of things. So that's why we end up working with the native Make API calls for Airtable inside of Make, right? Because it allows you to be more flexible, to build things thinking about the users and thinking about the iterations that you need to have in order to build more versions. So, but those are things that you start to realize when the product or the workflow that you're working on requires it, right? When you feel like, oh, but setting this, like giving it to someone is easy, but for them to setting up is a mess, right? So the fact that you have to copy one value and then go to another, things are going to move so fast and they are moving so fast that, of course, these kind of tools are getting like a second thought, right? But I find them very valuable because they allow you to kind of see the things visually, right? Like kind of grasp how the flow of the thing and where do you want to get that to and who is going to receive it. So it's a very interesting practice to play with these tools because where there's, as I will show you, there's a point where we're getting at where you just ask, right? You just ask the thing like, hey, I need this API point, and now you just need to tell it, hey, tell me options, open source options, and I will show you a little bit later this about Cline and other tools that you can give them just some context, and they go and look for the documentation, they compare things, they tell you, okay, this is the advantages of using this technology. This is the disadvantages. So it's every day it's getting easier, right? But as I told you, the value of visualizing the things that you're building is huge. And I've seen so much people that are using Bolt.new and they're using other kind of those tools that once they discover Make, they say like, oh my God, I was wasting so much time trying to make it work, right? But when they suddenly see the thing flowing with nodes and these things that move when you see them traveling, the information traveling through nodes, well, it kind of get your mind organized, right? And I feel like we're entering, I heard a story about this that it blew my mind, and it was like a guy that I would respect a lot, and it was saying like, hey, I was talking with a 21-year-old guy, and this guy suddenly during the talk he just stops and look at me like in shock, and he confesses later that what is happening to him and to people like him is like they are giving the thought process to the AI a lot, right? So they are finding that when they are having a chat with someone, it's like they are calling Chat GPT, but it's not there. I guess that at some point you will be able to do it in your glasses. Already is happening, right? In your earbuds or whatever. But my point is that we need to be able to see the big picture in order to really get, because these AIs are really good, are getting really good, but they're just as good as the idea and the context that you give and the restrictions that you put on, right? The constraints. So it's really important that in this whole process is your mind which is involved, right? Because yeah, of course, the AI can do a lot of things by itself, right? But the value of the human experience, it can't be replicated by a machine. So that's the
Totally
value
agree.
I see in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Let's continue.
Okay, awesome. So now we are going to go to one step further, and it's something that I'm very excited to show you. It's called Model Context Protocol. This protocol that was built by Anthropic in order to allow the LLMs to use different tools, different APIs and have a structured way to pull the information, to request it. And one thing that I noticed, well, I will tell you a little bit later what I've noticed about it, because it's tricky. It's not as easy as tell the machine, like, hey, interpret this API, because there are so many moving parts. But let me show you a little bit more what is all this about and why I think it's going to get huge, huge. I'm building an MCP directory, by the way, because I think this is going to blow up. And the one of the things is that we can have this technology inside of Cloud Desktop, but also inside other tools and inside our IDEs. IDEs are tools like VS Code that are used for programmers and nowadays for entrepreneurs like you and I to code, right? And Cursor and another tool that I will show you that is amazing, and connect them through your local resources, right? And your external resources. So as you can see here, all this is local in this example, right? You have a local data source, you can have your file system, and you can also connect different things in the internet, different protocols, different APIs from the internet. So you have like a host, right, which is in this case Cloud Desktop, right, and you have also the clients and also the MPC servers, right? So the clients are the protocol that maintains the connection with the server, but the servers are the ones that are in charge of telling the host how to interpret, how to digest those API endpoints, that how to structure the information. So, that's so in order to the host to be able to get your natural language instruction, process it through the API. I mean, think about the documentation, all these payloads, and all that I have shown you, and it has to interpret your language and to convert in the kind of payload that that specific API endpoint will receive. So you can guess there's a lot of moving parts. And for example, for Airtable, it's really tricky because if you look at Airtable, they have a bunch of fields that all of those have different options. All of those fields are treated differently. Some are optional. Some things are required, right? So the host have to process all that and to remember exactly how it is structured. So that's what the servers are in charge of, and is telling exactly what structure to give to the final API endpoint to process that information. The API endpoint processes that information and sends it back through our server, and the server send it to our host, and now we have the final result, right? So all of those things are happening in milliseconds, right? You can notice how fast that information flows, but all that have to happen in the correct order. It could not be like an extra comma because everything breaks in that moment. And as you maybe have realized already, these LLMs are incredibly good at making random assumptions, telling you, I'm sure that it's that way when it's not. They are able to lie just to avoid being shut down, how it's had been shown lately, right? So it's a pretty tricky technology. And somehow I'm not against, but I'm cautious about the way that humanity is implementing it, because if they can lie in order to survive, imagine if someone put like a really nasty goal. Well, it could be profits, right? Do everything you have to do. We need 100K in profit every month. So you can imagine if you can't guardrail that technology, how things could go bad. So that's why this kind of protocols are so interesting, because they allow the machines to be a lot more precise, right? To give structure outputs, to get the confines, to get these contexts really delimited, so they only can output what we want from them, right? So that's the revolution that is happening right now with this MCP technology, that of course has a lot to do with APIs, and that you can use APIs in order to build these tools for the common users, right? So imagine if you now your product, your system or your program or your interface now has the ability to be able to access it through API, but on top of that, that you can access that from cloud. So imagine that at first with the chat GPT, it was a mess. Like if you try to give it some actions inside the assistant, it was really difficult. And good luck with trying to manage Airtable from that, right? So the this is the last part that I want to show you, and is about Cline. It's this amazing agentic system that you can install in VS Code. You can do it. You don't have to have Cursor. VS Code today launched something amazing for free, like copilots for everyone. I don't know why I don't have VS Code right here, but you can do exactly this for free, right? You don't have to get Cursor. You can do it for free, and you can have Cline inside your VS Code, and this is totally free. I have to warn you that when you start to having a long context, it will start getting pricey, right? So the best way to approach all this technology is to at least Cline is to have like a very well structured and complete first prompt, that you know that you can get something really concrete and finished with that prompt, and then you can start iterating to give it more functionality or whatever you want, right? But this thing is so amazing that you can tell it right away that to use some technology or some endpoint or some open source project. It can make the research, it can browse your screen, right, your browser, and it is able to gather the documentation and to build things around this. And the best thing about it is that now you have MCP servers inside of it, right? If I think if you go here, I can show you the ones that I already have here, which are like a couple. I haven't played with too much with the MCP servers there, but as you can see, it can also use the MCP servers, right? You can ask it to install an MCP server for you. Like you can tell install, and it will will take. Well, this is instructed with all these MCP technologies, so it will be a lot easier to create these kind of things, right? So I'm just telling to play. You can change some options here. It can be really autonomous, but I don't recommend it. I recommend that if you're going to enable all this, just get this one without enabling, because it can do a lot of things without your supervision. It tends to go crazy about it. It's better to leave this one unticked. So as you can see, it's going on, it's creating things. There are some errors and some things there. I'm going to tell it to save it. It's asking for some dependencies, but as you can see, it's trying. Look at this. I need to add the Brave MCP server to configuration. It's adding it to the configuration, right? Now process while running. Okay, let it run. So the cool thing about this is that you can automate a lot of things, and that has been trained with this MCP server stuff already. I think that maybe these errors that are happening is because of the location of these things, but we will see. But the important thing here is to show you how all this technology is evolving and is getting easier to implement these kind of things. So at the end of the day, what matters is right here is like installing dependencies and things. I don't know why it's taking so much, because in desktop, in cloud desktop, is so easy. I will give you like a quick tip, right? That so you can start using. I maybe this is so advanced for some of you. So a quick tip to use it inside cloud desktop that you will find really cool, and is you can go to the context protocol, to the model context protocol page, where I've been featured, by the way, in the Airtable server. Look at this. I have to brag a little bit, and this is my server. Look, this one is the one I built, so it has been featured there. But what I wanted to show you is that there's one special server that is like the ring to rule them all, and it's this one, MCP installer, right? So you will have to go into your cloud configuration file which is shown right here. You can find it in these locations, and you just copy this code and paste it on the file. You need to remember to structure it the right way. So usually you need one more bracket right here below it and one bracket above it opening, right? As soon as you open the file, you will find two brackets, right? And you just copy this and put it in the middle of those two brackets, and it works. So this way, you just tell Cloud to install Fetch and MPC, for example. Fetch is like context protocol. It is running the MCP server from MCP installer. This is the one that I show, that I tell you that you need to install first in order to be able to install the others. So I'm going to allow it. It found it, so that's amazing. And below you are able to find the responses from this one. Is just installed via US successfully. Look at that. So now I will have to restart the cloud in order to be able to catch it. But as soon as you do, you will find it right here. So you can see now I have a lot of tools. Some of them like install a lot of different, like for example, Airtable install like 5 or 7 tools or things like that. So in order to be able to update the record, there's one tool, right? In order to update a table, there's another tool. So now you can see how it could get messy. But in my experience, even though I have all these pieces installed, it is able to recognize exactly what I need, right? So if I tell it like create an image of a flying pig landing in a flower, and it is able to go ahead, look at these flux, right? It's able to recognize what kind of API, what kind of endpoint, or in this case, what kind of server we need in order for it to go ahead and create our image. Here is it. Okay, there's our lovely pig. So now you can see how you can start playing with this, because you can gather context, you can gather data, you can browse the web, right? And everything without leaving cloud. In all of these is thanks to the APIs and to the MCP protocol that I know that is going to be used widely on the next month.
Very cool. Very cool, Felo. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to add the link to Fresh in the comments here. I don't know if that's clickable or not, but Felo does have Fresh. Where else can people find you and learn more about what you've got going on?
Well, if you buy Fresh, you will get access to my private club. It's called Not a Coders Club, because the AI is the one in charge of coding, and we are sharing those experiences with the group. So that will be really valuable. I don't have like an English social presence right now, right? It's just big moves and with what we have done. But yeah, in Spanish, I am kind of more audience and that. But yeah, in big moves, you will find me. You can ping me. You can send messages there. So I'm really active there, right?
Hey, thanks for watching. This Q&A section that we're just about to get to is reserved for Massive Moves community members only. So if you're not part of the Massive Moves membership yet, there'll be a link down below where you can learn about it. But it's a community of entrepreneurs and builders who want to be on the leading edge when it comes to AI automation. So part of the Big Moves marketplace that we're building is an educational community as well, where we learn about automations. We have different product lab sessions, technical support sessions, as well as expert masterclasses just like this. And as part of the membership, you get access to these live masterclasses where you can ask questions to the guest experts as well. Plus, we have credits and discounts and deals and so much more. So go ahead and check that out now, and we'll see you in the next video.